Who is the real Jesus Christ? You see, some people say that Jesus was just a great teacher, wasn't he? All of those great parables which we have and all of the great stories that he had and some of his teachings. Some will say, yeah, surely he's a great teacher. Some will say that Jesus was a great wise man, especially his moral teaching was so wise in his day. Some will say that Jesus was a great and a mighty prophet sent from God. But we've got to ask, who is the real Jesus? And why is it that this humble carpenter's son from the kind of backwater of the Roman Empire came to be the most influential man who ever walked planet Earth? What was so amazing about this man that would change the world forever? And so I just invite you in this series of videos to keep watching and to learn more about the man who changed the world. In our first video, we're just going to be looking at some of the extraordinary claims about Jesus, particularly linked to his claim that he had existed even before his own birth. Now that's a very odd claim to make, isn't it? If you or I were to make that claim, people would just think we're rather strange, because we know that, we have a birth certificate that has our date of birth on, and we have the birth story of Jesus related to us in the Bible, in the book of Matthew and the book of Luke recount that for us. So we all know when Jesus was born, but what about this claim that Jesus makes that he had existed before his birth? Now you might say, well, where does Jesus make this claim? He makes it repeatedly throughout his life. And so, for example, in John chapter 6, and verse 38, he makes a claim like this: "For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but to do the will of him who sent me." That is Jesus talking about his Father, that he's come into this world, and he's come to do a task. He came down from heaven. Now, for you and I, we know we come into our existence at our conception and birth. That's when we start the clock on how old we are, and we measure our lives from that point. But Jesus is making a different point here, isn't he? That he has come into this world, down from heaven. And later on, he'll also be discussing with the same people, and he'll say the same, but the reverse way. "What then if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to heaven where he was before?" And that's in John chapter 6 and verse 62. He's saying, just as he's come down from heaven, one day he will go back up. And he made that point to the people that were listening to him. So, for example, in John chapter 8 and verse 23, he says, "You are from below, but I am from above." Now that's a very strange claim, isn't it, that Jesus is making there? But he's drawing a distinction that us as normal human beings, we start life down on this planet. This is where we're born, and this is where life starts for us. But for him, he existed before his own birth. And he continues later on in that discussion. He's having a discussion with some of the Jews of his day, and he says to them, "Your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad." So the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham?" And Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." Their response is to pick up stones and try and stone him to death. But the claim that he's making there is utterly extraordinary, that even before Abraham, who had existed over 1,000 years before him, he was there. It goes even further than that, though. And so in John chapter 16 and verse 28, we've got Jesus claiming, "I have come from the Father and have come into the world." Again, repeating the one we have earlier. But notice just a chapter later in John chapter 17, he's now praying to his Father. And he says this: "Now, Father, glorify me in your own presence with the glory I had with you before the world existed. That's an amazing thing that he's saying to God there, that he had glory with God even before the world existed, even before the mountains and the seas and the oceans, before all of creation. He was at the Father's side in glory. Now, what sort of claim is that? He says, furthermore, later on in that prayer, you loved me before the foundation of the world. Jesus is making an extraordinary claim here. More than just what a good teacher would make, or a wise man would make, or a prophet of God would make. You see, we all know that we're rooted right here down in the earth, children of the earth. And yet Jesus is claiming to be someone completely different. Now, why does this matter? In this series of videos, we want to be making the case that Jesus is the man who was unlike any other, a completely unique life, a life lived unlike anyone else's life. But not only was he just an amazing man, not only is he the most influential man who's ever walked on this planet, not only has his teaching travelled across the world, not only has his teaching changed the lives of people from continent to continent, but also he makes extraordinary claims about himself. Claims which you and I cannot just ignore or put aside. See, when we combine these two things, the amazing life of Jesus and the amazing claims of Jesus, what they combine to present us with is someone we cannot ignore, someone whose life we must examine, and whose claims go beyond just who he is, but also on what you should do, that you should live to follow him. And he invites everyone to do exactly that, to come and follow him, the child of heaven, come down into this world, born into this world for us. So much so that early Christians writing in the Bible again would make the same claim. So in the book of Philemon and chapter 2, it says of Jesus that he didn't account equality with God something to be grasped, but he humbled himself, taking on the very form of a servant, being born into this world. Why? That he might die on a cross for you and for me. That the man who was different would come into this world to pay the penalty of our rebellion against God, of our rejection of God and our breaking of his commandments. That we might be forgiven, that we might have a place of heaven, that we who are rooted down here in the dirt might have a way made for us to enter glory. He came down so that we could go up. And again in Colossians chapter 1 and verses 15 and 16, it presents Jesus as the creator, the one who established the heavens and the earth, the one who entered into his own creation, so that the very people that he made could drive nails through his hands and his feet into a wooden cross. That wooden cross made of the wood of a tree which even he caused to grow. Those people driving in those nails were people whom he allowed to live as he gave them life in their mother's wombs, as he reared them and raised them. And it's the same for you and for I. If you reject Jesus today, if you reject his claim on your life, you do so with breath that was given to you by him. Now, if you're skeptical of that, then I just invite you to carry on listening and learning more about the unique Jesus Christ.